Okay, so now we get to the third part of this lecture, and so we've moved from the scientific management, which was very much based on the manufacturing sector. We moved to the human resources group of theorists who said we need to pay attention to our workers as well. And now we're going to the type of work that needs to be done within a different type of organization that we call organic organizations, as opposed to the manufacturing style, which are called mechanistic organizations. Okay, so this is called quality. That's how, and this is kind of like in the 1980s. That's when it started. So we're still going down that timeline. And so for this particular segment or lecture, we're going to be talking about the contingency model, about TQM, which was advanced by this man called Deming, about learning organizations, about evaluations and the role that evaluations have on work, given that we're going to trying to go to a different model. And then we need to focus on work in a quality way. So I'm going to be talking about these different things. Okay, and so for this contingency approach, what happens is that we have to kind of know the type of organization that we have, and more so the culture within that organization. We've talked about organizational culture off and on, during the semester. And so basically, this is what it's saying. People come in and they have different needs. And so they're called affiliation needs. And so it's how you interact with coworkers, given that you have a professional life, but you also have a personal life. You may have worked at places where you say, she talks too much about her personal life, or, she tells me everything about her date last night or whatever. And so it's the organizational culture that's kind of going to uh, put the parameters on what's going to be more acceptable, to be talking about your personal life and your professional life. So these are like the group's norms and the values. Okay, but on the other hand, you cannot disregard a person's personal life, because that's their life. That's what they need to live, or the parameters that they have in their personal lives, but they still need to get the work done. So these group norms and values are basically how a group should act within a professional setting, and so they're formal and informal groups, and it talks about appropriate behavior. I mean, even to the point where you say how people should be dressing, should they be wearing a suit. I mean, some offices actually have dress codes which say you have to dress this way or you have to dress that way. One time I had a student who was in a master's program, the MPA program, and she was working for a particular agency, and I don't remember which agency it was, but that agency was basically telling them that they had to wear closed-toed shoes. They could not wear sandals. They could not wear open-toed shoes. And eventually she left and she came to work at the university, and she told me that the first thing that she did was to buy an open pair of shoes. Well, that was their dress code, so that was the norm. Here at this university, uh, probably the male professors have a lot more latitude than the female professors. It's kind of like, well, you need to present yourself more professionally, more of an authority figure, whatever. But that's just part of the organizational culture. Okay, a lot of times it may be driven by the mission of the agency. It may be that I know that when I worked food stamps, they would tell us not to dress up a lot because of the people that you're going to be seeing. The clientele did not have a lot of money. They were on food stamps, right? It's when you come across as being like too, hoity-toity or whatever, they're not going to be able to relate to you. So, it kind of depends on the mission of the agency as well. It also may be the parameters may be contained around, or set up around, the climate and the environment of the physical conditions of where you're going to be working. If you're going to be in a factory type job, you dress one way or you act one way. Or if you're in an office type situation, it's going to be something else. So basically, in the organizational culture, just saying this, you have to kind of pay attention to what your particular organization is doing and how you need to fit into that organization. Your coworkers, more than anything else, are going to be the ones that are going to be fostering this type of organizational culture, and they're going to be giving you cues about what's going to be acceptable or what's not going to be acceptable. Of course, that doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to be more direct. We had a situation with a faculty member who's no longer here that would always wear gym shorts and flip-flops, even though he was told you need to dress up, you need to dress up. He just refused to do it. And so anyway, so he did not get promoted and tenured, and so he's gone. He did not follow the organizational culture. He was not open to following the organizational culture. Part of the affiliation needs, believe it or not, no, you probably know this. It depends on whether you're a man or you're a woman. So it's gender based. Basically, they say women tend to have higher affiliation needs than men do. And so a lot of times these can be very simple type affiliation needs, such as, oh, good morning. And if you don't respond good morning, oh, why is he angry with me, or whatever. Or if they don't ask about how's your kid doing, I heard he was sick, little things like that. Women tend to appreciate that more than men. Another concept or tenet that you can say that's gender based is the sharing of knowledge. And again, you may have already witnessed this, but men and women tend to look at the sharing of knowledge within different frameworks. For example, men tend not to share what they know because they view it as a source of power, whereas women are more willing to share whatever knowledge they have because they want to be more inclusive. So, you may have worked for both. You may have your own personal style. You may prefer one style over another, but the studies kind of show that there is a gender bias when it comes to these types of things. And now we're having generational issues. And so we have like many, many generations. For example, I'm a baby boomer, and then we have the millennials. And so it kind of depends on different time periods. And pretty soon we're going to have what's called Generation Z. And Generation Z, the millennials, the Generation X, the baby boomers, we all have different ways that we view work more than anything else. For example, baby boomers grew up with this notion that they had to work hard. Generation X grew up with this notion that they had to make a lot of money. Millennials grew up with this notion that they want a more balance in their work life and personal life. We don't know about the Generation Z yet because they haven't really entered the workforce. So the way that it works out, if you are a manager, is how are you going to meet all of the needs within these different generations in order to have your organization function as it was and to get productivity out of all these people. Uh, I think that maybe the baby boomers like myself tend to think that we know it all, but I know that we don't know it all. I think that the younger generations or probably do have a lot to teach us, especially when it comes to technology and the way that they view technology as being more of a way of life. There's when it comes to technology, there's a pro and a con to that because when you there almost all of the workplaces have gone to technology. We have email everywhere, we have social media, we have whatever. But the thing is this, or this is the way that I see it, is that we don't ever disconnect from work. You're always available 24/7. And so how that plays out is that you don't have like that much of a separation between work life and private life. So in a lot of ways, I see what the millennials are saying. This is my personal time, don't bug me, right? Okay, then we get to another concept or another model called the total quality management, and this one started in the private sector. And so it kind of did work in the private sector. It didn't particularly work very well in the public sector, although we did use some of the different tenets of that to engage it in the public sector. For example, basically, I'm not going to go into this a whole lot other than to tell you that there's a statistical basis that's going to be focusing on quality. So it's very numbers oriented. It's very results oriented based on the numbers. So it's the TQM model plus the organizational culture that's going to give a person a meaning of their meaning of work. And so since it was in the private sector, it's based on customer satisfaction, but we don't have customers in the public sector. So that model of TQM is not very successful in the public sector. And they tried it in many different ways. They tried, especially in the 1980s. It's not so popular anymore, although there still are elements of it that we still retain here in the public sector. And so some of these things that we did adopt were teamwork. And so now both sectors use teamwork as well as the nonprofits. They use teamwork. They're looking for people that are using similar tasks and try to put them into like that type of team. What's important is to problem solve. You have to be able to identify problems, but if you just identify the problems without ever coming up with a solution, you're only going to be seen as a complainer. But it's like, okay, there's a problem, give me some solutions that you think might work. So it's what they're trying to do in this one, and this is a good thing. It tries to involve the employees in the decision-making process, saying, okay, this is a problem, so let's talk about how we can solve this. So it's a way to empower the workers. Of course, you have to kind of be careful because a lot of times when you get people together in this teamwork type of environment and you're trying to solve problems, a lot of times it just turns into a gripe session. And so it becomes unproductive because you're not really getting anything done. You're not addressing the problem. You're not finding the solutions to the problem. So for the public sector, these are the elements that were the most important. Is that one, we got a lot of assessment. Just about everything that we do now has an assessment component. We really look now about as to the ability or towards the ability to learn and to learn from our mistakes and to learn what works and what doesn't work. And the way that we do it is to try to find a way to measure the work that we do. Now, since it is so statistically based, what happens is that we tend to only value the things that can be counted and don't particularly value the things that are not being counted. Okay, let me give you an example of this. If you're working, say, for the state, for example, in Child Protective Services, you may have a workload saying that you have to work with, say, like, for example, 20 families. But you have a situation where that's very, touch and go, child life is at stake or whatever, and you may only work with that family, for a week. Does that mean that you're not doing a good job? Because only the number is counted, they're saying, well, you're falling down on your quota, if you want to call it that. But anyway, so the service sector, this is what I'm telling you, the service sector has measurement problems because we don't have customers, we have citizens, we have clientele, we have a lot more accountability, which is the values that I keep stressing, accountability, responsiveness, this type of thing that only we can do, we in the private sector can do. So the TQM model, we took elements of that, they worked, they're working for us, they continue to work for us, but not completely. It was not a very successful transfer. Okay, so now we get to learning organizations. A minute ago, I told you it's important that we be able to learn. So how is it that we learn? People don't know how to learn. You have to teach yourself how to learn. And in this course, in all my courses, that's what I try to do is to try to teach you how to learn. So this is organizational learning. So it's basically a new paradigm. It's a post-bureaucratic model. And again, this one came out like in the late 80s. And so they're saying, well, what we see is that there's a shift that there should be a shift in the values of quantity and efficiency to quality. So it's a shift in value saying we need to value what we do because we want to produce quality, not just quantity. We want to produce quality, especially when it comes to the public sector. And so some history of how we got to this place, that there's a difference, and I'm going to be talking to you about two different types of organizations. Y'all are going to be doing an exercise on organizational design for this particular course, and so this part becomes important for this reason. There are two basic types of the ways that you can look at organizations, of how organizations are structured. One is very hierarchical, and the metaphor for that is a pyramid. And this is a traditional model that came from the private sector. And so in this one, the hierarchy that we've talked about before, where there's that chain of command, it's used when there's machine-like precision that's needed. So it's mechanistic. You have to remember that word. It's mechanistic. And it came around the time where there was the Industrial Revolution, such as the Model Ts or whatever, for assembly line work. And so they used the scientific management for that, the scientific management theories, the one best way theories, because they said this is the way to increase productivity so that the United States could prosper as a country and become an industrialized nation. So that was what was needed at that time. But we're not there anymore. We're more of a service sector industry, and service, yes, service, sometimes you can say yes, it's working retail, it's working tourism or whatever, but service is also like IT, is anything that has to do with creative thinking. And so they said what we need to do is that we need to flatten the hierarchy. And so this particular model is the metaphor for this one is the brain. And so for this learning support model, they're saying services in high-tech industries came about in the services in the high-tech industries. And they're saying what we need to do is we need to focus on smart work. We need to focus on quality work. And so they use the term organic for these types of organizations because they say you can't put everything into one way of thinking of how it needs to be done. We need to be able to learn and learn from each other and learn what works and what doesn't work, because that's the only way that you can learn. If you're too afraid to make mistakes, nothing's ever going to change. And in a lot of ways, sometimes things do need to change, whether we want it or not. Okay, so in order to do this thing called job enrichment, that's basically saying you need to learn a lot of different parts of the organization, not just what you do, such as in the hierarchical model, which is like you have a specific task, you have a specific job, and this is all that you do. And in order for it to be more of a learning support model, you have to know how the organization runs and the different types of jobs within the organizations so that you can kind of like cross-train for different types of jobs. So the way that we have it in the public, so those are private sector. So the way that we're looking at it in the public sector, well, guess what? We're still hierarchical. It's still that pyramid model. And it parallels the private sector, but the output is different. The output is different. We have services that are being delivered. We don't have Model Ts that are being delivered, but we're still using that hierarchy. And so we're still using that scientific management model to a great extent, and we're still using the values of efficiency, privatization, and this thing called reinventing government. If you want more information about that, you can look at the book, but basically this was under Clinton. And so they went to the model, and it was very much a model where they're saying the output, let's see, everything that the government does has to be efficient. There has to be a cost to it. You have to be able to cost it out. Otherwise, get rid of it. Don't do it. So a lot of the different services that we were delivering kind of went to the private sector. I mean, the privatization has been going on for a while. It's from the 80s. It went through the 90s. So reinventing government, saying the public sector is going to be looking different now. Uh, we have to kind of like depend on the private sector and the nonprofit sector to a certain extent. We have to streamline government, and maybe that's the best way to put it. We have to streamline government in many ways. Okay, so then this is the issue here. The type of work that we do is not so much mechanistic. So is that pyramid model working for us? Can we move to the brain metaphor given the institutionalized and ingrained hierarchical structure of bureaucracy? Every single organization that we have, including this institution, we kind of went through that already. It's all based on the hierarchy. Can we ever move away from that? Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. Is the output of the public sector amenable to the brain instead of the pyramid? That's one thing that you have to kind of think about. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe elements of an organization can be hierarchical. Maybe elements of an organization or departments of an organization may need to be more brain-like, more of a learning community. How can this be achieved? I mean, these are questions that we don't know. They're the big questions for the public sector. People have been studying this and writing about this, trying to get it to change to this pure post-bureaucratic model, but nothing has worked so far. We're still very much hierarchical. So, but then you ask yourself, well, why is she pushing this post-bureaucratic model? Well, the thing is this: it's a learning organization is learning communities or learning organizations are important to the public sector for this reason. What we do is service-oriented. We're not mechanistic. We are organic. And when it comes to learning organizations, or in order to transition to a learning organization, there are norms that need to be determined by personal values. But in a public agency, what happens is that you become the bureaucratic man or bureaucratic woman. So these are the values. Don't interject how you feel about something. You just do the job. It's already been set up this way. You do the job. So in a way that kind of goes against the grain of a learning organization. People that work in public sector, in the private sector, kind of like working in the private sector because they say what I do identifies who I am, or you identify with the job. But what you do in the public sector is just as important as what you do in the private sector. And so the meaning and the judgment of what your work is, or what the value that you get from the work, comes from the relationships with your professional colleagues and from one's manager. And I kind of talked about this in a previous lecture. So, uh, what gives you intrinsic satisfaction? And that's the best way I can put it. What is giving you intrinsic satisfaction? Is it the meaning of the job? Is it the self-actualization? Is it the self-esteem? So these types of feel-good types of intrinsic type of identifiers come from your professional colleagues, from your peers, and not so much from your manager. Of course, if you have a manager that's always trying to undermine you, that doesn't help either. So, I mean, I guess you need both, but you get your job satisfaction or that intrinsic satisfaction from your peers. So in order to be a learning organization, what you need to do is you need to be able to engage in what's called double loop learning. And so it's a higher level of learning. And so what this is says, okay, I have to be able to understand what the norms are, or the culture, the frames of reference and assumptions that need to be changed. Okay, and so it's like, this is the problem. These are some possible solutions. Which solutions would work best within this particular the parameters of this particular problem? Why might they work? Why might they not work? And we're going to be talking about decision making, in another lecture. But you have to look at it and you're saying, is it going to work, or is it not going to work? And so if you think it's not going to work for some reasons, maybe the assumptions need to be changed. But this is the important part. Don't be afraid to make changes, because that's where the learning comes in, and in this manner. Okay, you need to be able to build a shared vision. And the shared vision is basically saying, well, a lot of the organizations have already gone to this. A lot of the public sector, as well as the nonprofit sector, have like shared vision exercises. You can call it a mission statement. You can call it a vision statement. You might call it a strategic plan. But it's saying, this is our mission, and this is how we're going to carry out the mission of this organization. These are the things that we're going to do in order to change to deliver the services that we have, and what we want our organization to stand for. Another skill is that you need to be able to change mental models. I guess that's saying, think outside the box, or listen to what people are saying. Don't get involved in what's called groupthink, and I'll talk more about groupthink when I talk about decision making. Because if everybody's seeing things the same way, and if no one is saying, well, let's talk about it in this way or in that way, let's change the assumptions that this is going to happen or if that's going to happen, then you'll never be able to engage in this double loop learning. And so the double loop learning then is that systems model that I showed you a while ago, the one with the feedback loop. It's saying, in order to engage in that double loop learning, you need to use the feedback tool, saying, okay, these are the inputs, these are the things that we've been doing, this is the services that we have provided. Did they work? Did they not work? The feedback loop is that double loop learning, saying, okay, they did not work for this reason, so we need to change something. So let's find out what it is that we need to change. The feedback loop. Okay, so some of the barriers, though, to this type of learning, these types of learning organizations, is that most people don't know how to learn, and that's what I told you just a minute ago. We have that hierarchical model that's entrenched. It's entrenched in the bureaucracy for the public sector, because it is a control mechanism. It is a control mechanism, and so basically what they're saying is that we have the hierarchy, we have these directives that come down. You should not really question the hierarchy. You just need to do what we tell you to do. We see that at this university all the time. You need to do it this way, and we need to do it that way. Don't stray. This is what needs to be done. And with that concludes this particular part of the lecture. I'm going to be doing a lecture on organizational structure, and that's going to be leading to the assignment for designing organizations.